Well, today we're going to finish up the series Growing Pains. And the main idea, now kids, remember this, okay? When it hurts, don't give up. When it hurts, don't give up. Okay, we're all gonna have to go through these pains. When it comes, don't give up. They actually say, does anybody know how long a pastor has to serve in a lead pastorate before he starts to make an impact? Anybody? Minimum of 5 years at the best case scenario. You get a prize. Now, not chocolate, because I don't want your doctor getting upset with me. So maybe like maybe a piece of toast. I'm just kidding. That's a joke. Is my brother, when he had his son, they were real protective of him, and they wouldn't give him sweets like cookies and stuff. They just gave him a piece of bread. So we were all eating our Christmas cookies, and he had his piece of bread. Poor guy, huh? Well, that's the whole joy of being a kid, is you get to have cookies, and he didn't even get that. Robbed of his childhood. Too funny. Yes. Minimum of 5 years. Usually it's longer. 5 to 7 years is the bare minimum there. And there's going to be a lot of pain for me involved. Right? I can't give up. Right? There's going to be a lot of pain for you involved. Right? Can't give up. When it hurts, don't give up. Everybody wants to grow, but growth is definitely a pain. Let's go through the chart one more time. This is the last time we're looking at it, because next week we're talking about something else. In order for something to grow, it has to change. So growth equals change. As something changes, that equals loss. It is losing something. As there is loss, so there is pain. Nobody likes losing something. So we could say growth is pain. I'm reminded of the growth cycle of a tree. You've got a nut. It's on the ground. And it starts growing, and as it grows, it starts having changes that come to it. And before long, you don't even recognize that nut anymore, because it's starting to have something coming out the top. It's got roots coming out the bottom. It's unrecognizable from what it was before. It loses what it was before, and it becomes something new. And we all experience something very similar. And as that tree grows, it's going to have to be pruned, which is pain, always the pain. So there's two things with there's two kinds of pains that happen. The first is a result of loss. So you are losing in your process of growth, and that hurts. That's a pain. Think of it like this: January 1st comes along, you want to get fit and healthy, right? Everybody does it. They stick with it for about 2 months. But what happens is January 1st comes along, and you experience the first pain. Not going to the gym, getting up to go to the gym. 5 o'clock in the morning never hit so rough. You can say, okay, I'm going to get up at 5 in the morning to go to a concert. Done. 5 o'clock to go to the gym? Oh, no. This is the worst thing that could have ever happened to me. That's the first pain. It's the result of a loss. You're experiencing pain because you lost something. In that case, sleep. But then the second type of pain that you experience is a cause of growth. It is the catalyst. It is the instigator of growth. Another way of saying that is you have to go through the pain in order to have the growth. And this would be similar to working out at the gym. It hurts, but then you get healthier. You grow. Your heart grows, or your muscles grow, or whatever. Well, hopefully your heart doesn't grow, because I think that'd be bad. An enlarged heart probably isn't the best thing that can happen. But I mean, your the overall health of your heart. Okay. Deuteronomy 34, 4-8 shows us the first kind of pain. This is a pain that is a result of loss. So let's catch up to the present. There's this nomad out in the desert, Abram. Nobody knows him. He's a nobody. Then God takes that nobody and makes him into a nation. And as that nation grows, they are stuck in slavery. Not the best start for a thing, but it's not how something begins, it's how it ends. Okay, so God takes them from slavery, and he changes them into a nation. And in that nation, we have the law and all that stuff. But in order for that to happen, we had to go through the loss. Oh, it would have been better for us if we would have stayed in Egypt. I remember how we had it before as slaves. But that pain of the loss. And so now we get full circle to pain. Growth equals pain. The Lord then said to him being Moses, "This is the land I promised Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, all the forefathers of the nation. I will give it to your descendants. I have let you see it with your own eyes, but you will not cross it." So man, what a disappointment. You work for something your whole life and you never even see it. Oof. So Moses, the servant of the Lord, died there in the land of Moab, according to the Lord's word. He being God, buried him in the valley in the land of Moab, facing Beth Peor, and no one to this day knows where his grave is. Moses was 120 years old when he died. His eyes were not weak, and his vitality had not left him. The Israelites wept for Moses in the plains of Moab 30 days, and then the days of weeping and mourning for Moses came to an end. Ended as soon as it began, and that's it. That's how the story ends for Moses. A little bit disappointing. Not really what we had in mind, but here we have this pain. So this pain that they're experiencing is that first type of pain. It's the result of loss. For Israel, it's a pain because they lost their leader. For Moses, it's a pain because he wasn't able to go any further. This was the end of his journey, the end of his cowboy, march into the sunset. This was the end. And the thing that we see here, though, with this kind of pain, we see that God is working, but it hurts. God wasn't done with Israel. It was his plan for Moses to die, but it hurts. It hurts for Moses. It hurts for Israel. It hurts. So it's not that God isn't working in this type of a pain. It's just that it's a waiting period. Nobody likes the waiting period. They would want it now. Maybe more so in America than in other countries. But, there is definitely this idea that if I have to wait for something, it can't be good. Because anything worth having, I can have right now. But how would you think about this with me, okay? How would you like God's plan for the church to be held up by you? What a terrifying thought. Because that's exactly what's happening with Israel. They're getting ready to go into the promised land. This is the thing that God's promised us for. But something had to happen before it happened. What was it? Moses dying. Moses was in the way of Israel receiving their promise. How disastrous. How unfortunate. And so the question becomes, well, why did God wait? Why didn't he just kill him earlier so that nothing would have kept Israel from walking into the promise? Well, because God was patient with Moses. God loved Moses. He loved Israel too, but he also loved Moses. So we get to Joshua, and it says this: "After the death of Moses, the Lord's servant, the Lord spoke to Joshua, son of Nun, Moses' assistant. Moses, my servant, is dead. Now you and all the people prepare to cross over the Jordan to the land I'm giving the Israelites." So, okay, you are now free to roam about the country. And that brings us to a key thought here, okay? Moses was no longer the right leader for the job. Moses had been the right leader, but now Israel had moved past him. Think of it in modern terms, okay? You've got this pastor. He's done a great job, but it's time for him to move on. You know what I mean? A great example of this was Pastor Blair, who was here before Pastor Settle, and he made the comment. He said, it's time for someone else. It's a difficult place to be in, to hand something down and let it go. Oof. Especially, I was in my office the other day thinking, this is not my office. This is an office that I currently work in. And in time, it will once again be somebody else's office. See, this isn't my church. This is a church that I am serving as a pastor at. See, it's God's church. I'm just filling a role that God calls people to. See what I mean? And when I'm gone, God will continue to lead the church forward. It's not going to be dependent. It's not going to depend on my existence. Does that make sense? Israel was still a nation. Israel still had great things coming for them. Moses' part of the story was done. And that must have been a very painful experience. That's what we're talking about, pain. Growth equals pain. Pain has to happen, not just as a result of growth, but to cause growth. Without pain, there really can't be any real growth. So Moses was not the right one anymore. We saw a lot of things that had to change. Here's one of the things of how this affects the nation of Israel. Israel was taken out of slavery, and they were about to go out of their desert wanderings, but they weren't ready yet. See, in their heads, they were still slaves. And then after that, 40 years later, in their head, they were desert wanderers. They weren't a nation to inhabit Canaan up here. They had to go through the pain of changing into what God wanted them to be. So we see pain all around. Well, then we hop back in the story to Exodus chapter 5, and we see the second type of pain. So that was the pain that comes as a result of loss. You lose something, it hurts. God's still working, but it hurts. Then the second type of pain. The king of Egypt said to them, Moses and Aaron, why are you causing the people to neglect their work? This is what we were reading at the beginning of the service. Okay, so Moses and Aaron go to Pharaoh of Egypt, and they say, hey, please let my people go. Pretty please? They ask nicely, and he's like, nope, you're lazy, you're causing them to be lazy, all y'all need to get out of here. Get to your labor. Pharaoh said, look, the people of the land are so numerous, and you would stop them from their labor. How dare you? That day Pharaoh commanded the overseers of the people as well as their foremen, don't continue to supply the people with straw for making bricks, as before. This time they must go and gather straw for themselves, but require the same quota of bricks from them as they were making before. Do not reduce it. So I want them to be able to be more efficient with less time. Not the best business strategy, but I'm not Pharaoh, so I'll keep my mouth shut, I guess. For they are slackers. That is why they are crying out. Let us go and sacrifice to our God. Impose heavier work on the men. Then they will be occupied with it and not pay attention to deceptive words. You got to wonder. Here you got Pharaoh in his palace. Like, they are slackers. You're sitting in a palace, dude. Like, maybe you don't really know what you're talking about. Then the Israelite foreman, whom Pharaoh's slave drivers had set over the people, were beaten and asked, why haven't you finished making your prescribed number of bricks yesterday or today as you did before? So the Israelite foreman went in and cried for help to Pharaoh. Why are you treating your servants this way? No straw has been given to your servants, yet they say to us, make bricks. Look, your servants are being beaten, but it is your own people who are at fault. But he said, you are slackers. Slackers! That is why you are saying, let us go sacrifice to the Lord. Just so that we're clear, let me insert this little historical detail here. Egypt did allow for people of different religious orientations to go and celebrate their festivals. This is not a new idea. Okay, this is not something that Pharaoh's like, perish the thought. Egypt did allow for this to happen. Okay, he's just being persnickety about this. When they left Pharaoh, they confronted Moses and Aaron, who stood waiting to meet them. May the Lord take note of you, judge, they said to them, because you have made us reek to Pharaoh and his officials, putting a sword in their hand to kill us. So Moses went back to the Lord and asked, Lord, why have you caused trouble for this people, and why did you ever send me? Sorry, computer's being silly. Ever since I went into Pharaoh to speak in your name, he has caused trouble for this people, and you haven't rescued your people at all. So a lot of emotion there. A lot of emotion. You have Pharaoh making it worse as Moses and Aaron are obeying. So this is the second type of pain we see. God is getting ready to grow Israel into the next stage, from slaves into a nation. He's getting ready to move them. But before that can happen, they have to go to this long, painful draw. And that painful draw is going to launch them into the next stage of growth. We know the story. After this, they go through the different tribulations and stuff with the, the plagues and all that, and then eventually they get let go from slavery. So we know how the story ends, but they didn't know how the story ends. They just know this man from the desert came and gave us this message that God heard us, and then that's not what happened. He may have said this is what's going to happen, but that's not what happened. What happened is we now have to go through a lot of pain. See, the pain was necessary to get to the growth, but in pain we don't really care about the growth. We care about the pain. So, pain that causes growth. The only way you can say is it really has to happen. It has to happen in order to move on. It has to. There's no way that God can move things forward without conflict. It has to happen. There has to be a pain that comes of some sort. And, think about the different things that happen in your own life. Major things that God has brought you through. You went through pain, and then God took you to another place. Right? Hasn't it always happened that way? It always will, too. That's just kind of the fact of life. You can't, what is it the saying, you can't have an omelet without breaking eggs? You can't have a child without going through labor. It's one of those things that it produces it. It comes from it. So you have pain really all around. It's at the beginning of the process and the end of the process. It takes us full circle. I'll mention that some other time. And the thing about pain is that both of these forms of pain are necessary. And that's because pain that comes from loss, as you experience loss and you have that kind of pain builds faith. Put yourself in Israel's shoes. Here they are getting ready to go into the promised land, and their leader dies. That's not the right time for that. Think of if you're trying to take over another company, and then the person who's negotiating the whole deal dies. Bad timing. This is really bad timing. They're at the threshold, ready to inherit the promise, and the leader dies. Remember, they're still just hanging out in the desert. They've got enemies on every side. This is not a good time. Well, what does that mean? That means that Israel had to have greater faith in God. When we go through pains in life that are a result, so we're growing, we're changing, we're losing, and we're experiencing that pain. We talked about this last week. You have to come to a place of trusting God more than you used to. Well, then, when you have the other kind of pain, the pain that precedes the growth, the pain that causes the growth, what does that produce? It causes a growth of character. See, yes, God could have just spoken a word, and Israel would have been free from slavery in Egypt. That could have happened, but he didn't. God also could have spoke the word, and all of creation would have come into existence, no need for days. Right there, just like that. He could have, but he used 6 days instead. See, God can do things in that quick, urgent way, but usually he takes us through a process. He takes us through a process. In our lives, in the church, everything is a process. I heard it joked at once that, all we do as people is wait. And that's very true. We wait for the doctors, or wait for the mail, or wait for our boss, or wait. Yes, that's all we do. But as we go through these two different kinds of pain, our faith is growing, and our character is growing. Israel had to grow, because check it out, if God would have taken Israel from Egypt without any of the plagues and all that unpleasantness, they would have given up right off the bat. Look how easily they got discouraged. The very first, within a couple weeks of Moses coming and saying, God sent me to free you, they're already just dismayed, completely beside themselves. They had to grow. It was something that was good. It was necessary. But the thing is, we look at pain and we see the pain feels unpleasant, therefore it is unpleasant. But the reality is pain is a catalyst to growth. Pain is how we get there. And both pains are very much necessary. You could say it definitely gets worse before it gets better. That's just the way things go. It does get worse before it gets better. And so Israel had to learn, and we have to learn the same thing, to learn to rise above. We all have to learn that. See, when a church isn't growing, people really start to worry. It's all right. You aren't the first church to experience this. It happens. Worry's going to come. It's normal. And as things get kind of stagnant, people get kind of desperate. And when that happens, you kind of start seeing the death of the church, and you start really freaking out. And so then what people do is they turn to this thing of appeasement. When it gets down to about 20 or so people, it gets to this thing of mostly just appeasement. When everybody says, okay, look, we don't know what we're supposed to do, but things are not going well. So let's try and keep the people here happy that are here. And maybe if we just keep going steady, everything will be okay. But the thing is, in order for you to grow, you have to take risks. You have to step out. You have to do things that you're not comfortable with doing. That make sense? Like me taking a pastorate. What in the world were you guys thinking? Was I thinking? Was God thinking? Man, oh man. I just look at my qualifications and I say, yeah, I'm probably not the best person for the job, because that's how we see things. And we start to worry about stuff. Oh no. But, these are all natural, normal things. You aren't the first church who has had to go through, trying times, and you won't be the last church. It happens. And these won't be the last trying times that we have. Somewhere in the back of our heads, we think we need to get a pastor so we can go back to normal. Look at COVID 2020, right? Everybody kept saying this. We need to get back to normal. We need to get back to normal. But things don't really ever go back to normal. They just continue to grow and change throughout your life. That's just kind of the way it goes. My kids, back to normal, Mike is 8 now. Well, one day he's not going to be 8. One day he's going to be 16. Return to normal would be him going back to 8. So, it's not going to happen like that. And unfortunately, what I've seen in many churches is sometimes growth becomes stopped by a few because they're too scared to step out in faith. And this is exactly what we saw in the book of Numbers last week. So Israel's getting ready to call them out. They take a look at the land and they say, nope, no way, no how. This is a terrible idea. And what had to happen in order for Israel to walk into their promise? They had to lose the people who were holding them back. Painful times. Painful times. Imagine this. I am concerned that they weren't being a pain just to be a pain. They were being a pain because they were concerned for the safety of their families. Aren't you concerned for the safety of your family? That sounds like a good thing to be concerned about. And yet, God tells them this: you're going to die in the desert, and your kids that you're so worried about, they're going to inherit the promise. And sadly, what I've seen happen very many times is when a church gets to that level of lack of direction and vision and hope, you find that they're actually held captive. And when those few people finally leave, the church starts to grow. It's a terrible place that I have sadly seen too many churches at. I have a saying that I hold myself to. It goes like this: if you don't grow, you got to go. I, as a leader, have to grow. Now, this kind of applies to you guys because as the church grows, you're going to have to grow with it. You're going to have to change with it because you won't be ready for the church of tomorrow if you're not there today. You know what I mean? But it mostly applies to leaders because leaders are the ones who really lay the culture of the church. And so as a leader, if I'm not growing, if I'm not working for that, I got to go. It's time to put somebody else in the driver's seat. You know what I mean? It's one of those things where it's not about my ego. It's about the future and hope of the church. And when you get the right person in the job, they grow. They set the precedent, and that's how things happen. So, but I think all of us desire kind of the idea of we have to do the same things the same way. And that will help. And we kind of try to double down. And I think the reason for that is because we just don't like pain. We're averse to pain. We try to hide from pain. And the thing is, those who grow are going to face pain from those who don't grow. And those who don't grow are going to face pain from those who grow. The two are going to be at odds. I think a good biblical example of this is how it mentions the way that in the last days, so the church is going to have some people who claim to be of the church that aren't really going to be of the church, right? And they're going to cause a lot of problems for the people who are the church. And they're not going to be happy either because they're not getting their way because the church is not swerving from their goal and from their focus. So you have that kind of laid out in Revelation and some of the other places, but the idea there being that, pain is going to happen whether you're on board or not. So why I say that is because a lot of times we say something like this: well, if they just wouldn't have gone to Egypt, if they wouldn't have left slavery, if they wouldn't have rebelled against Moses in the desert, if they wouldn't have gone to war with the Canaanites, if whatever, they wouldn't have had to go through the pain. If I wouldn't have done this in my life, I wouldn't have had to go through that pain. If this wouldn't have happened in life, I wouldn't have had to go through that. But the thing about pain is it's not quite so cut and dry. They would have still gone through pain, just like you would have still gone through pain. But the pain wouldn't have been meaningful. The pain that they went through wouldn't have been meaningful. Yes, they could have stayed in slavery, and they could have endured that pain. But that pain would have had no purpose. It would have just been pointless pain. Do you know what the people did in this 40 years that they're in the desert? Nothing. They did nothing. Their shoes weren't worn out. Do you know why their shoes weren't worn out? Because they didn't do anything. They sat there for 40 years. 40 years of doing nothing. But they were safe and secure. They didn't take any chances. It reminded of the parable of the talents, where the guy says, I didn't want to, I knew you were a hard man, and I didn't want to, anything bad to happen, so I made sure to bury my talent just to make sure nothing happened to it. And what does God say? You wicked servant. It's exactly the idea that we have here. Yes, they were safe and secure out in the desert where they weren't supposed to be. So they still had to go through pain, but that pain was pointless. It was 40 years of wasted time. To put things in perspective, I'm not even 40 years old yet. They wasted more time in the desert than I am old. That's a long time to waste in the desert doing nothing. So you will still go through pain anyways. You can't run from it. Chris Sonkson once wrote, and I very much so agree with this, you will either have one of two pains in your life. You will have the pain of discipline or the pain of regret. In life, you're going to have the pain of discipline or the pain of regret. Pain of discipline says, I don't want to do this, I'm going to do it anyways because it's what I should be doing. Right? Pain of regret says, I wish I would have done that. I really wish I would have done that. I really missed out on that opportunity. See, God wants more for you. He wants more for me. He wants more for the church, for Roswell. He wants more. But He won't force. He won't force. In 40 years, for Israel, it was still 40 years later. Whether they grew or not, it was still 40 years later. They needed to face the pain and grow. And why do I say that? Because people all the time say something like this. I'm not sure if I should go to college because that's 4 years of my life. I'm not sure if I should do this because that's this much time in my life. That time passes anyways. In 4 years, it's still going to be 4 years later. The only difference is, are you building towards your future in that 4 years? See, in 10 years, it's going to be 10 years later. The question we have to ask is, where do we as a church want to be in 10 years? Where do I as a pastor want to be in 10 years? I have a goal of where I personally want to be growth-wise in 1 year. I have a 10-year plan. I don't have a 5-year plan because I kind of feel like that's pointless for me because of how I do it, but not really important. The moral of the story being here, I have plans and goals of where I personally want to be. Where do we as a church want to be? Where are we going towards? A lot of times we just don't even ask the question. And there's this life cycle of any organization. I have it here on the screen. Every organization goes through a process of birth and death. Every organization. It doesn't matter if we're talking about churches or companies or whatever. The thing is, we all want to aspire to live in the prime. That's the green dot that's on that left side there. But the thing is, most of us search our life for a place of comfort where we can stay where we are. But the thing about staying in the prime is you're constantly stepping into new things, into things that are uncomfortable. You can tell where you are as a church or as a person by this. If somebody doesn't talk to you for a year and they come back in a year, is everything the same or is there a change? It's a good little self-diagnosis I do. If people see the same Michael in a year that they see now, I'm in trouble. If people see the same crossroads that they did last year, we're in trouble. That's how growth happens. It's not comfortable. It's a place. It's a mindset. And the first growth that needs to happen is us. We inside need to grow more than we need numbers to grow. It's a necessary starting point. And we'll talk about that next week. But why I bring up this chart is that what people don't realize is that a church starts dying when there's still people there. I've done a lot of work with churches who are in later stage. You guys are not in late stage, so everybody take a breath of air. We're good. We are on the right side, but we're not in the death stage. It's all right. We're good. Obviously, there's going to be changes that need to happen, but they're not like life or death. We need to make them right now. So, just kind of let's keep praying and seeking God and see where we're going. But when churches get closer to that death stage, they always look back and say, I remember back when we were a big church. But if you look at the growth chart, it shows by the time that the church starts shrinking and having problems and growing and falling apart, that happens when the church still has a lot of people. And then it starts to die, and then in time, people start leaving. So you don't go back to the thing that you did when people started leaving. You go before that. And that takes us to a point that I want to make in your own life. You want a different result, be it as a church wanting more people, or you as a father, as a mother, as a spouse, as a child, as whatever. You have to do something you aren't doing. You have to do something you aren't doing. If what you're doing was good enough, you wouldn't be where you are. The choices that you make got you here. Do you want to go there, or do you want to stay here? For Israel, they had to lose their leader in order to go forward. In my life, I wonder, what are the things that I need to change? What are the things that I need to lose? Your growth and the church's growth is determined by how much pain you can endure. Are you able to look at the pain that God's called us to and say yes, because God has more for us? Or do you look at the pain and shy back and say, no, I want things to stay exactly how they are? The choice is really ours. We're looking into the future. It's up to us. If we want to stay, we can stay. But nothing happens in staying. What pain do we want to go through? So how in the world, what can we take away from this? Bottom line from all this, we've got Moses dying, we've got Israel suffering before they're brought out of slavery. What's the bottom line? What can we take away from this? Well, there's two things. The first thing is outlast problems. Outlast your problems. Moses had to go through the pain Israel had to go through the pain of losing Moses in order to move forward. It was necessary. And if Israel hadn't have outlasted the problem, they never would have been set free from slavery in Egypt to begin with. You have to outlast your pain. In your marriage, in your family, in your job, in your church, there's always going to be points of pain that come. It's always going to happen. And if you give up, you don't get to the next level of growth. God has you repeat the trial. And that's not a fun place to be in. Think of Israel. How many times did they have to keep repeating the same trial over and over again? And then they were stuck in the desert for 40 years. You have to learn how to outlast the problem. When you are facing someone in the church, I know this happens, when you are facing someone in the church, maybe you just don't like. And I think you guys know what I'm talking about. There's going to be people who kind of rub you the wrong way. When that happens, it is your instant thought, well, I'm leaving. Or are you going to outlast the problem? You have to outlast it if you want to grow from it. The second thing, learn from your pain. Boy, we do love habits, don't we? We'll do the same thing over and over again and suffer for it and still be okay with it. I was actually, I'm sure you guys are very familiar with these kinds of situations. There was a woman who I worked with that she was in an abusive relationship. It was not good. Well, finally, got freedom from it. Everything was good. A clean break. She was able to move forward. Things are looking up. She found another guy who did the exact same thing. Not joking. It gets worse. Finally got out of that 1.5 long thing. Another guy. I'm not joking. 5 different guys. And last I heard, she's still with the 5th. Not willing to make the change. We hurt, so we find something that just repeats the hurt in our life, and then we don't learn from it at all. We just keep repeating it. The most common response to pain is to give up and get bitter. This hurts. This is unpleasant. Nope, 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 nope. Not for me. When you experience pain, maybe you don't like them. Maybe you don't like how they do it. Maybe you don't like what's going on. Maybe you don't like, why aren't we doing this? Why are we doing this? Whatever it is, the thing that's irritating you. You have to grow and change. You have to go through that pain. What is God trying to teach you through it? What do you need to change in you from the pain? People, situations, and think about this, okay? When I go through a painful situation, this is what I think. How can I stop that pain from happening again? This is what God wants us to think when you go through a painful situation. What can I learn from this? Completely changes your mindset. What can I learn from this? Got in another fight with my spouse because they just won't stop doing this. Okay, what can you learn from this? Well, I learned that they're a stubborn pain in the butt. Okay, well, that's something. But in the meantime, what can you learn from it? I'm having this repeated problem with my kids, teenagers. So what can you learn from it? Well, I'm having this problem at work. So what can you learn from it? That's the bottom line. What can you learn from it? If you don't learn from your pain, you repeat the pain, and it becomes pointless. It doesn't matter if we're talking about people or situations or sin that's in your life. It doesn't matter. You have to learn from the pain. Lord, I pray that you would raise our threshold for pain in our own lives as you're growing us inside, as you're helping us to become more like Christ, that we wouldn't demand to be treated in a higher honor than Jesus Christ himself was when he came and came as a servant and died. Help us to repeat that same mindset, that we would come humble and die for the sake of others. Die inside, die to self. Lord, I just pray you would raise our pain threshold, that we'd be able to look forward and say, this is for a greater cause than my happiness. Lord, I pray you'd give us firmer faith through this, all the different things we're going through. I pray you'd make us more humble, make our hearts not so stiff, that we'd be able to listen, that we'd become less arrogant. God, I pray you to help us to learn from our pains. Help us to grow from them, God. And I pray, Lord, that you'd help us to outlast them so that we can be around long enough to learn from them. And we thank you, Lord. Amen.